Lovely. I think the arrivals are slowing down now, so we'll kick off. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining our talk on what does AI mean for copy and social media in 2023. We're delighted to be here to be talking to you about this. My name is Charlotte Zamboni. I'm the Director of Marketing and Culture at Global Action Plan, and I'm chairing this session along with Jo, who I'll hand over to now to introduce herself.
Hi everyone, I'm Jo Burnham. I'm one of the marketing managers at Brighton Dome, Brighton Festival, and I consult with the with the cultural sector in the UK on AI and what it means, basically.
Lovely. So what we're going to do with this session is I'm going to kick off with a brief 5 minutes context setting and reflection on AI and perhaps some of the challenges that it might pose in terms of the kind of ethical impacts it could have on our sector as a whole. But that's done in the context of recognizing all of the playful, exciting, creative opportunities that it presents to us all, and that we're going to hear about from Jo, and which I personally am very excited to hear more about, because we're all looking in that area. So, but it's just a little bit of reflection of how, as we progress with AI, we as charity comms people and as environmental communication people can be mindful of establishing best practice in the way that we use AI and the way that we kind of showcase the best of that use across other sectors. So I'm just going to share my screen and very briefly let you know why Global Action Plan as an organisation is working on AI and big tech, and then share a few of these thoughts around these ethical impacts. So what Global Action Plan does is mobilizes people and organizations to take actions on the systems that harm us and our planet. And for us, the online system, big tech and AI, is one of those systems that can potentially harm us and our planet. So we have got a movement we call the online climate movement, and our work on AI sits within that movement. And this is kind of born out of recognition over the last few years that social media is a complex tool for us as environmental communicators. We all use it, we all depend on it. You know, we can't imagine going back to our fundraising colleagues and telling them we're no longer going to use social media to recruit runners or to get individual donors. Equally, you know, a lot of the way that we offer our services is through social media. But we do recognise that it has some significant harms and some harms that we can legitimately talk about as a sector. We know that it drives emissions in itself. There are stats now that say that big tech as a whole drives more emissions than the aviation and transport sector put together, and that's set to continue. So, I mean, in itself, it's a driver of greenhouse gases. It drives consumerism, and that's something that we've been looking at as an organisation, how online advertising perhaps drives us to buy things we don't want and we don't need. And it can be a driver of disinformation and misinformation. So those are some concerns that have been we've been considering around social media. And then when we take those concerns across to AI, our view would be that essentially they're not a different set of concerns, but because of the power of AI, it essentially turbocharges some of those complexities that we need to be mindful of. So if we look at those energy impacts, it is predicted that between now and 2025, with AI coming into play and driving so many more of those greenhouse gases, that as a sector, big tech could be up to 5% in terms of the greenhouse gases that it contributes. And actually, on that advertising piece, the power of AI is that it allows that hyper targeting. You know, so much will be known about all of us that advertising will be able to speak to us in an incredibly precise way. And there are some concerns around not only how that will drive us to spend more, but how that might erode some kind of well-being issues for children and young people. And this issue around eroding trust and truth, I mean, I think we're all already seeing this. We're perhaps already concerned. You know, some of the stories around the kind of fakes, the Keir Starmer and the Sadiq fakes that have happened recently. And we'll all be mindful, I think, of some of what happened around the EULAs and how some of the power of kind of AI and big tech in manipulating that kind of anti-EULAs vote and misrepresenting the number of people who were actually anti it, to kind of give a false impression around a strength of feeling that didn't really exist. So there are some emerging concerns around how AI can start to erode trust and truth. And actually, you know, what we're all going to need if we're going to see change, the change on climate action that we need, are strong democracies and a really trusting, compassionate public discourse. And there is a concern that AI could work to erode some of that trust that we're going to need to build. And just to wrap up before I hand to Jo, you know, there are 64 national elections over the next 12 months across the world, and it'll be really interesting to see in a kind of context of an AI world what happens within those elections and what role it plays in that kind of outcome. You know, it's worrying, but there are things we can do to manage it. So we can come back to this in the questions. Jo's going to talk for about 25 minutes and I'm going to stop now and do come back to questions on some of these issues if you'd like to. But just a few of the things that we might want to be mindful of as we explore this wonderful and creative, playful world that Jo's going to take us through, is just checking that these sources are trustworthy, that we're using the images honestly, that we've considered perhaps some of the misinterpretation or wider societal consequences that might come from the way we're using stuff, that we've actually applied that lens to it, and that we exert our social license. You know, it's, as charities, we are trusted. Can we add our voices to call for greater scrutiny and risk assessment around AI? So just some thoughts to share with you. And now I'm going to hand over to Jo, who I'm very excited to hear your thoughts and ideas on how we can use AI to enhance the work of our organisations.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. That is fascinating. I really want to immediately just get to a conversation about so much of that. And we can obviously talk about that in the Q&A following this. So thank you so much. I'm just going to set this all up so I can see it. So hello, everyone, today. So yeah, I'll be speaking for about 25 minutes and then there'll be a Q&A session, but we'll take some questions. I'm Jo. I generally use she, her pronouns. Quick visual description. I'm a white, feminine presenting person in her mid-30s wearing glasses. I've got like a necklace on and a small jumper and a collar. I am marketing manager of Brighton Dome and Brighton Festival, and I've worked in the arts and culture sector for about 12 years at different theatres, roles all around the UK. And I was most recently at the Birmingham Commonwealth Games, which was a lot of fun too. I invite you to introduce yourselves in the chat, say where you're from. It's always really interesting to know that as well. And this is going to be quite a short session. So often when I do these, they're anywhere between 1 hour to 3 hours. This is 25 minutes. So this is really going quick. But what I want this to be is hopefully not entirely superficial. I really want this to be a couple of breadcrumbs, some tangible things that you can pick up, that you can start using after this session if you want to. This is probably not the first, it's definitely not the last session on AI that a lot of you are going to be seeing. So I don't want to just repeat kind of a lot of the things that you've probably heard before. I want to kind of jump in, have a bit of fun, talk about some other perspectives on it that you might not have got from other places, maybe you have, and kind of see how that all goes. So yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to. I encourage you to make these slides full screen or expand them as much as you can. Expand your mind, expand your screen. And I'll go off script a bit, but I will try and keep this to 25 minutes, or I'm sure somebody will kind of flash at me and we'll go from there. So yeah, really excited to be here. Let's get started. So here's a quick agenda for today's session. So like I said, a lot of these topics they're kind of rabbit holes in themselves. They could be their own conferences, let alone their own topics in a slideshow, but I'm just going to go through these. We're going to talk about AI and mindset just for a few minutes, because the more I talk about AI with people, the more I've realized that mindset is almost the most important thing to talk about as a primer. Then we're going to look at some useful terms that we can go through. Then we're going to look at some possible AI applications for environmental communicators, particularly working with copy and working with data, which I love the whole data stuff. I hope we have some people who are into their data here. I'll try not to be too nerdy. Then we'll have a quick discussion on prompt engineering, which you might have heard about. It's a fascinating topic, but perhaps overblown, but we'll explore that. And then we'll look at some resources about how to go further. Something to say at the offset as well, I'm not going super heavy into the critical perspectives on AI in this talk in particular, but please know that, and I'll reference this throughout, but there are so many different considerations with AI that can affect your perception of it, that can affect its value, that can affect its fairness. And so we'll touch on some of that, but I'm very aware that this talk does not give it the length that it really does need. So have that in your mind as well, if you like. So let's get started. And this talk today is all about text-based AI. We're not looking at image creation. We're not looking at VR or music, although those are also fascinating applications of AI, and you can obviously explore those. The slides that I have, if you're interested, were made with DALL-E 3, and they were also made when I had bright pink hair last week, which has gone so much quicker than I thought it would. So now it doesn't make any sense, but that's why the character has bright pink hair. So let's get started. And let's really take a moment to just step back and kind of, address the elephant in the room, which is this is all a bit weird, isn't it? We've gone from AI being something which we talk about in almost a sci-fi context, or maybe a bit in a computer science context, to suddenly everyone's trying to learn about it. It's everywhere. We're being confronted by it. Is it going to take our jobs? What's going to happen? There's a huge amount of emotion which is swirling around with AI right now. When I talk to people about it, I get cynicism, frustration, excitement. I get a lot of fear as well, skepticism too. There's this idea that we're going to, miss the train. Suddenly all our colleagues and all our competitors in these different spaces will know about these tools and we won't, and we'll be left behind. And oh my goodness, it's terrifying. So I want to kind of take a breather, even though I'm talking at a million miles an hour here, and kind of accept that, yeah, it's a bit of an emotional topic right now. And how can we engage with that in a way which feels positive and constructive, rather than, reading the occasional article about worrying things AI could do, feeling our adrenaline rise, and then stepping away from it, which I think is a tendency that I've definitely done before with some things. So I relate to all those feelings, and the way I talk about AI is kind of twofold. I relate it back a lot to the rise of the internet in the 90s. I was saying earlier, in the same way that there's no one way to do the internet, there's no one way to do AI. There's no one expert opinion. There's no one best use of it. There are loads of perspectives on how it can be used, on its quality, on its ability. But with all that said, you're going to be the best expert for your own work. No tool, no matter how shiny or how hyped up, is going to replace your own experience in what improves the quality of your own work. So I always want to kind of turn this back to people and say, actually, you have the agency here to decide what tools you want to use in your work and what tools make your work higher quality. Because when I talk about AI, it comes from a place of how do we improve quality, not how do we save time. With that said, I'm also not like an advocate or an evangelicist, I don't know what that word is, for AI. I very much take the view that engaging with it and having fun with it is probably the quickest way to learn. So pragmatically, I keep coming back to this idea of fun, not because I want to have fun and ignore the criticisms, but I actually think you learn faster, you make better connections, you understand the critical perspectives faster when you're allowing yourself to be playful, to engage with these tools, and rather than to build up a psychological fear of them. I don't think that's helpful. So that's where I kind of come from with this. I encourage playfulness, I encourage some silliness, and to kind of shrug off some big emotions. Okay, well, that's my little diatribe on AI. Let's hop into some terms. I'm also going to suggest as well, very briefly, that because a lot of us in this room right now might be the people in our organizations who are most interested in AI, I really want to kind of challenge you / provoke you to think about the sort of conversations which might be happening in your organizations about AI right now. I don't know about you, and I'm speaking entirely from my own perspective. Please disagree with me if you want to. But I feel like a lot of the time when AI comes up, the same usual questions are the ones being spoken about. which are usually quite philosophical. You know, is AI evil? Will it take all our jobs? Will it become self-aware? Can it do creativity? And I find those questions fascinating. I could talk about them all day. I probably have at times. But also, I would just give an invitation / a provocation of, in our own organizations, is there an opportunity as kind of almost the people who are at this point more interested in it to maybe take a few steps forwards in that conversation and maybe start talking about more of the tangibles with our colleagues. So maybe talking about which tools we've used that we found effective, or surprising prompts that we found give cool results, or how we fed the results of one AI into the input of another one and it's created something brand new. And what was that? So really going a million miles an hour here, but just an invitation really to think about how can we get the conversation to the next level sometimes in our organizations, because I think it's time to. I think we've talked about if AI is evil enough. I think it's time to start looking at the details and finding some really fun examples there. So let's hop into large language models, or LLMs. Now, I hate acronyms. I've avoided acronyms my entire life, but I have been around everywhere, and I'm sorry to tell you, LLMs are one that collectively, if you're into AI, you're going to have to just swallow and get okay with. So LLMs is large language model, and I'll use that throughout this talk. So if you take away one thing, it's LLM is large language model. Now, ChatGPT, which kind of kicked off the party a little bit with modern AI enthusiasm, is an LLM. So it was trained on 300 billion words in its set of data. Now, you can understand LLMs through an analogy. So imagine that an AI is like a really well-read student, and it's read vast amounts of books and articles and online content. And the more text that it consumes, the more knowledge it can kind of accumulate. And this is how LLMs work. So just like a well-read student can kind of intelligently discuss a wide range of topics, an LLM can generate surprisingly human-like text on the prompts it receives. Its vast training data enables really interesting conversational abilities. And we'll come back to why the training data is also very important when it comes to AIs and how this can be an area of criticism too. There have been lots of other really interesting AI launches in the last year. So we've had some image generators, which are fascinating. We've had Midjourney. We've had DALL-E 3 was just released a few weeks ago from DALL-E 2. Stable Diffusion is an amazing open source image generator that is free if you have the computing power to use it. And then, of course, there have been lots of other text and LLM generators too. So we now have GPT-4, we have Claude from Anthropic, and we have Bard as well from Google. And Google are apparently about to release Gemini too, which there's lots of hype about. Apparently it's meant to be amazing, but I haven't seen it yet, so I have no idea. So yeah, lots of stuff happening all the time. Every week there's so much to catch up on. But also that's why this is an incredible time, because since news is happening so quickly, the entry point to get to the front of the queue on knowing about AI is actually really low. You can spend a weekend just getting into this stuff, and after the weekend, you will be pretty up to speed on a lot of the current developments, simply because things are happening so quickly right now. So it's actually a wonderful time to jump in. If you're looking for just one recommendation right now on which LLM is most capable, probably not a big surprise. I would personally suggest that is GPT-4, which is the paid version of ChatGPT. This isn't the free version, you do have to pay for it. But overall, that is my recommendation if you want one right away. But I would say that if you're not at the point yet of paying for AI and you're still kind of curious about it, Claude can be accessed for free. I think you can send something like 20 messages for free. And that has abilities which are almost as good as GPT-4 in lots of different areas. It can't do image generation, but it can do work with data. It's really good with copy. And that's one that I would suggest is good for experimenting with if you just want to start now and try something out. So let's keep moving on. Let's go over some useful terms as well. LLM we've talked about, but I'm reinforcing it. Large language model. Prompt, you might all know, this is just the text that you write and you send to the AI. It's just a command. Prompt engineering, we'll talk about a little bit more in a moment, but this is just the process to improve your prompt essentially. So it gives results which are more useful to you. Training data, again, we've touched on this. This is just the information that the AI was trained on. This, of course, opens it to quite a lot of different criticism. Obviously, if you train an AI just on, say, all the text of Twitter or X, you might well find that there are certain problematic things that pop up there. So keeping one eye on the training data is incredibly important when it comes to sort of critically evaluating some of these tools. Token. So for simplicity, we usually would say that one token is about 1 word, maybe slightly less. So when you hear that GPT-4 can process 32,000 tokens, that usually means about 30,000 words. Although actually very recently, I think GPT-4 has just gone up to about 120 something thousand tokens. So that's also increasing all the time. Hallucination, you might have heard of this. So sometimes AI systems really do invent things, completely make it up. It's kind of sweet in a weird way because they want to make us happy so much that they will lie to us, which would be adorable if it wasn't so annoying. They are getting better at this. Some AIs are worse than others, but right now it's something you really should be aware of. It can happen. So always do check what you get back from an AI. And then agent. So agent is kind of becoming a quite common word now just for an individual AI. And often people talk about agents when they're stitching lots of different AIs together to create sort of a larger AI that can do more complex things. So when you hear someone say that they've created a program with 20 agents, that just means they've got 20 different AIs that are sort of working together like a little company to do something interesting. Yeah, so that's kind of a quick run through of a couple of terms that might be popping up. So let's get into copywriting, which is one of the most discussed applications of AI. As a professional copywriter, I do have some skepticism about this, but also I think that it's not necessarily the most interesting or the most powerful use of AI right now. But I do want to cover it because I think how we talk about copywriting and AI says a lot about how we talk about AI and a whole bunch of other things it can do. So what do I mean by that? Well, if we're using copywriting as our example, let's take a step back and consider what we actually mean when we say copywriting. Because a lot of the time, humans use a single word to describe something, which is actually a really wide collection of very different skills and processes. So for example, with copywriting, that could include things like audience research to understand who you're writing for. It could include event research, so doing interviews with people, reading articles, watching performances or attending exhibits to better understand who you're writing for. It can involve strategic understanding of where the copy is being used and what images are alongside it. It can involve SEO knowledge to know how it's going to be displayed on Google. It could include knowledge about accessibility and writing for accessible audiences. It could include all sorts of things, including 2 very important areas, which is writing for multiple stakeholders. I'm sure we've all been in a situation where we've written something, but 2 different people in our organization want it to be slightly different. How do you balance that? That's also part of copywriting. And then probably the most important skill in copywriting, and one of the least talked about, which I always find strange, is the ability to seek feedback on what you've written and criticism on what you've written, which a lot of people find, quite difficult to do and don't feel confident doing. So those are all different processes and skills that we kind of talk about when we say copywriting. And depending on your job, your role, copywriting might mean something entirely different to you as well. So when we're talking about AI and we're talking about copywriting, it's really important to actually take a step back and consider that whether each of these processes individually could be an area that we could engage an AI with to see if it can improve our work. So, you are going to get much more interesting results rather than just saying, please write some good copy about a cafe that we've opened. You can instead say, please read this piece of copy, advise me if it's accessible to this type of audience, or if it's good at SEO for this type of website. And you actually narrow in a lot more on the specific area of copywriting that you're trying to work on. This is useful for 2 main reasons. One, it just produces results which are more actionable. You're much more specific in your prompt, which is a big part of prompt engineering. And then also it gives you a framework to evaluate critically what parts of copywriting AI is good for in your particular use case and what parts it isn't. So most likely, instead of having an opinion that AI is good at copywriting or bad at copywriting, your opinion can get developed a little bit further and say, well, actually, AI is really good for proofing, for extracting quotes from interviews and from trimming down copy, but it's really bad for this, really bad for this. And it starts to engage your critical mindset a little bit more than just having a binary, it's good or it's bad. So that's the process that I talk about with copywriting. And then you can, of course, apply that to any other job that you're giving to an AI as well. I'm going to keep on going now. Prompt engineering, I'm not going to spend ages on this, but again, it's just about making sure that you're creating your prompts in a way which are most useful to you. The number one reason I think that people get kind of lukewarm results with AI is they're just being too general. They're asking things that even if you asked a human, they would have a really hard time doing because they're just not specific enough. Different people will tell you that there's like different perfect ways to write a prompt, and some are probably better than others, but the perfect prompt is going to be the one that gives you the most useful answer for you. And that's always the case. So different people will say, oh, there's this framework or there's this framework. If you do that, you'll get the best prompt. It might help, but just remember that the whole point about why AI is useful is because it's very specific to your use case situation. So creating a prompt bespoke to your specific circumstances is always going to probably get you the stronger results. With that said, if you want sort of a starting point on this or an example, one that I tend to use is down there in the bottom left, the 1, 2, and 3. So I tend to consider the context. So if I'm asking it to produce, say, some copy for a website, I will explain what the website is, who it's for, what the copy's about, that kind of thing. I would talk about the goals. So if I'm trying to direct people to buy tickets for a show or to read more, or what it is that I actually want people to do, I'll explain that to the AI as well. And then I'll talk about the output. So whether I want it in a particular tone of voice, a particular length, in bullet points, whether I want it to rewrite the copy I've given it or just give me different bullet points on critiques of it, and be quite specific about what sort of output that I want. That's just an example of one way that you can structure your prompts. But again, there really isn't a perfect way to do this. People will tell you there is. I personally don't think there is. It's more about finding what works for you and then being as specific as you can to get to a point that makes it workable for you. Okay. So let's have a really quick play. I haven't included many examples in this talk, but I thought I would just do a really fast one with some data so you can see one example of what GPT-4 can do when working with data, partly because I would imagine that as environmental communicators, a lot of the work you're doing is perhaps translating very data-heavy results into maybe blog posts or campaign items or talking points or that kind of thing. And for me, working with data with AI is actually one of the best possible applications of this, because you're just getting these kind of breadcrumbs of what you could write about. You're getting ideas so much faster from the data that would otherwise take you so long to find. So let's just hop into one of these examples. So this is a file that I downloaded that has every artist represented in the Museum of Modern Art's collection. So that's over 15,000 entries, and we can upload that to GPT-4 and we can talk about it. So let's just show you what I've done here. So I simply uploaded it. You just press one button and upload it. And I just said, please create a visualization to show the date of birth of these artists. For background, these are all the artists included in MoMA's collection. Right away, it says, okay, sure, cool, looks good. It goes through, it tells me what it's seen. So it says the name, nationality, gender, birth year, death year. And it says, okay, cool, I've got an idea. I propose creating a histogram that displays the distribution of birth years. Does that work for you? Which I don't know about you, but I love that it asked me that. Does that work for you? Yes, that does work for me. Let's see what that does. So I say, that sounds great. So it says, okay, I'll do it. And then it brings me back this illustration. And it says, here's the histogram showing the birth years. It also, interesting, does some analysis right off the bat. So it talks about there being an increase in artists born in the late 19th and early 20th centuries and the peaks. It also asks about like any additional analysis or visualizations. I say, could you adapt this? So it indicates the gender of the artist, perhaps orange for female, green for male. It very happily does so. So you can kind of have a conversation with it to adapt the data as you're moving forwards. Here, I've just asked, can you make it more visually interesting? I don't think it particularly has succeeded here, although it is improving this. GPT-4 is now integrated with a DALL-E 3, and it's just about at the point, not anywhere near perfect yet, but it's trying to get to the point where it can create much more interesting visualizations with DALL-E 3 with this kind of data, so you can actually create real infographics with it. I don't think it's there yet, but I think quite soon it will be. It's getting very, very good. So you can have a conversation with it and change the output there. Then I've said, okay, cool, we're doing a project just on British artists born between 1910 and 1940. Can you create an amended version of that spreadsheet that only includes artists that fit that criteria? And it says, sure, and it spits out a custom spreadsheet that I've requested just based on that one text prompt, which I looked over and it looks fine. Again, I would always check the results you get from an AI. But to me, when dealing with 15,000 entries and cross-referencing it between gender, between country, between age, and then getting it so quickly, what I'm looking for me as someone who's not great at Excel, that is a huge time save. And this is like the day one stuff. There are people who are working with data. You can go on YouTube and kind of look at different examples of what people are doing with GPT-4, which blows my mind and is way beyond what I can do. But if you're into your data, it's a real theme park of stuff that you can do with it there. So just a taste. You can do this with Claude. Obviously, please only upload data that you're happy uploading. Don't upload anything confidential. Hopefully you know that, but I'm going to say it anyway. So do be very careful with what you ever put online. And then let's sort of wrap things up a little bit. So I want to assure everyone here that, AI isn't a field limited to people who are super technical or involved in new technology. This is something which we can all engage with. If you're fortunate enough to be of an age to remember the rise of the internet, you're actually at an advantage, I think, when it comes to AI, because you're used to the idea of technologies that can change the world. You've had the experience of seeing how a lot of experts get things wrong, that actually it's the creative people in random different jobs who end up making the big innovations, who make the next thing happen. And the whole idea of having the best practice doesn't really exist. It's about being as ethical as you can, obviously developing guidelines with your sector. But beyond that, a lot of the ways that these tools can be used, we're still discovering. So try and enjoy that. Try and let go of the idea of doing it perfectly. Obviously do it safely. But beyond that, give yourself permission to jump in, to play with it a bit, to get a bit hands dirty, and to have fun and to talk to your team about it too, and hear what different people are using it for. And then wrapping up really quickly, you might want to take a screenshot of this, or I can send it round if you email me. Just some resources that you can go to, some popular LLMs there, also some image generators. There's a website called Future Tools where you can try out lots of different tools for free, and they rate them based on sort of the user feedback. So you can, try different things out every single day. And I always think watching YouTube videos on AI is a great way to get up to speed. I really recommend Matt Wolf, really fun, really engaging, does about 20-minute videos every few days and just shows a few new tools. So that's, my kind of real whistle-stop view through AI. Again, I am just one perspective in this. I always encourage people to seek out as many as you can. But my main thing is to emotionally kind of just try and get through the fear right now, find a bit of fun, because the fun will often be the best teacher. It won't mean that you get rid of the criticism, but it will mean that you give yourself permission to go a bit further than you would otherwise. And that's actually when the coolest things are sometimes discovered. So that's the end there. Thank you very much. And I'll pass back to Charlotte.
Thank you, Jo. You did a brilliant job of, in a very short space of time, covering an awful lot and making it seem accessible and helpful. And particularly loved your perspective on copywriting, how you broke all that down so that it makes it all seem so much more useful, actually, in the way that you talked about it. And a lot of love for those slides. They were just fantastic. I didn't quite understand, in my ignorance, what you meant when you said how you created them. I think quite a lot of them would love to know if you could just tell us in a sentence or two how you make slides that look that gorgeous.
Sure. So those ones were created through DALL-E, which you can access through GPT-4. So pretty simple. I would just say something like, could you illustrate a felt cutout figure standing on a stage pointing to a screen that has a robot on it? And then GPT-4 will kind of think for a moment, or go, yes, that's a very good idea. And it will come back and give you an idea. You can amend it. Then once I get something I like, I'll download it, open it in Photoshop. I might stretch out the corners a bit. So some of those on the edges, I would have sort of replicated. So it stretches to the end of the screen. Add my text onto it, maybe do some filters, and then save it. And that's how I do slides.
Wow, no, that's real breakthrough stuff. Very inspiring. I think we all need to go off and use felt for our presentations going forward. Right, we've got some questions, which is fantastic, and I'll work through as many of them as I can in the next 10 minutes. So the first question we received is one that I guess I do still relate to in terms of the kind of some of the ethical fears around AI, which do feel genuine. And from from an organizational perspective, as I said, we're campaigning to make sure that we are mindful of some of these ethical concerns. So the question is really, can we dismiss them this easily? And what do we do? Do we listen to people with concerns? And how do we respond? If we can't say let's move on if the questions aren't helpful, how do we respond to people who share concerns? Perhaps people such as myself who might say to you, what about the misinformation and disinformation or the risks that we think might be attached to it? Difficult question. Not expecting you to answer all that fully, but
no, it is difficult. And I think that we have to get beyond the binary a little bit of either AI is evil or either we have to embrace it fully. And instead, I suggest taking the view that this is a technology which probably is going to become more prominent in our lives and in our work, and figuring out how we best learn about it in that case. Because the answer to everything, I think, with AI is to learn more about it. Even if you hate it, if you learn more about it, you can then make a more articulated case of why it shouldn't be applied in some areas rather than why it should. So I think the worst thing we can do is bury our heads in the sand or just read one article occasionally and get really scared. The criticisms are valid, and I think that we know how to engage with them when we learn about the subject a little bit more. That's kind of what I just keep coming back to.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful and a very practical response. And I guess for all of us, that means that this can only be the start for our organisations so that we understand the risks that we bring in as well as the opportunities we open up as we become champions of it in our various different ways. Right, a couple of specific questions. Are there any free text-based LLMs that are up to date with current affairs knowledge? And if not, when can we expect these? Claude, you were saying is that's more up to date than the old free ChatGPT, but does it give us up to date current affairs and knowledge?
I don't think so. I don't think that Claude is plugged into the internet. So I think its training data does end at some point in the last year or two, similar to how ChatGPT is used to as well. ChatGPT has recently updated theirs. So they now go to, I think, April of this year is their current level of data. ChatGPT 4 will search the web now, if you ask it to, for current affairs information. So as far as free stuff, not to my knowledge, there isn't a free chatbot that's completely up to date. You'll have to pay for GPT-4. I know that Elon Musk has just started to release Grok. I have no idea what's going on with that yet. So maybe that will kind of be the next one. I kind of doubt it. But no, at this point, the paid version of GPT-4 is the best way to get up-to-date information.
Lovely, thanks. Another question. Do AI written blogs negatively impact SEO? Interesting question.
Actually, sorry, just to quickly say one thing on my last, I realized because Google's Bard does technically fulfill that because it is free and it is plugged into the internet. I don't tend to recommend it, but that's just my own recommendation. But yeah, sorry, just to answer that question properly, you can actually use Bard for up-to-date stuff, but it's a judgment call of how useful that is. Sorry about that.
Okay, great. Thank you. The SEO one, is there any SEO factors that we need to bear in mind if we get ChatGPT or the likes to generate our copy for us?
You have to ask an SEO expert, which I am not. I would say that it's always useful. It's better than a blank page, and it's better if it gets a conversation started. But no, I would be fascinated to meet an SEO expert and look at them with what GPT-4 kind of recommends. I think that's a specific application area of it, which you need an expert to walk you through and to see how useful it is.
Great. Well, if anyone in the audience gets any kind of advice on that, then it would be great to hear it. Perhaps they could share it out on socials and connect us all up with it. That would be brilliant. Quick question. If you don't ask it in the, oh yeah, we've had how you did the slides, so that's brilliant. So a question here, yeah, an interesting one. What are the risks of sharing information with an AI? Some of us are scared of people using AI to summarize or read sensitive, restricted documents. What's your feeling on where we draw the line in terms of what we'll put into it?
I would say be aware that a lot of these AI programs openly say that what you give it, it's going to be training its next stuff on. They are not private. So by all means, share information you're comfortable sharing. I've shared my diary with it at one point, which I don't know if I should have done, but I was really curious what it would think. But no, it's not confidential. So do not upload anything which has even a slight trace of confidentiality about it, because it's just not. I would talk to the data compliance officer at your organization if you have one. But yeah, I would say lean on the side of caution with that. And if you want to just play with some of the features, maybe make up some data. You can download some different sets of data online that you can use for experimentation, but do not use anything that you're not comfortable potentially being copied elsewhere, because it could be. It's in their terms of service.
Okay, great, useful to know. What do you think we need to be careful about? This person used it for research and it gave information that they realized was wrong. How can we be sure of the accuracy of the information?
At this point, you have to check it. This is the thing. There's no AI right now that I would use without checking, especially when it comes to data. That's why the applications I prefer to use it for is getting ideas, because they're a little bit more like I can then follow those ideas up myself. I can then do kind of the legwork in progressing those. I would be uncomfortable at this point publishing a piece of data that's only been created by GPT-4. I don't think we're there yet. I think we will get to it, but I think at this point I would be very cautious of that, and I would always say the human element is still very much needed.
And there's a real risk there, isn't there, that the temptation to sort of get a bit lazy and assume that it's accurate without doing that checking, which could be a little bit tedious. That's where the risks lie in the misinformation, disinformation kind of.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I think a lot of these things come from when we try and save time versus when we try and improve quality. I think when you try and save time with AI, you often get into a situation where you unlock a lot more problems. Improving quality and realizing that it still requires a lot of the human involvement, I personally think that's where you get the more interesting, more valuable results from. Just trying to hop over tasks, well, you're not going to save much time because you have to check everything anyway. So it's sort of a different way of thinking about it, I think.
That sounds such an important principle, actually, and I haven't heard that articulated as clearly as you just did. And I think something really useful, again, if we are to be the kind of trailblazers of this in our organizations, that message that it's about enhancing quality, not so might be the thing that avoids kind of these pitfalls. So yeah, really interesting. Let's all bear that in mind. Right, we've got 2 more minutes, so let's just do a couple more questions. This is an interesting one. Are you able to sell what you create using AI?
Yes, you are. So you are protected by OpenAI, calls it the copyright shield. So essentially, yeah, they like to have the idea that you do own some of the copyright on it. It's a gray area for different parts of this. For images, there's still being settled law, but no, people are selling their designs on Etsy. They're making money off it. Where you stand morally on that, I'm not going to step into that. But increasingly, different organizations, different AI organizations publicly say, if you get in legal trouble, we'll pay your bills because we want you to start using this in your commercial work, which I think is fascinating, actually. If you're quite concerned about that, and that's something that concerns me as well, because obviously these are trained on artists, there are different products being worked on. So Adobe has a service called Firefly, I believe, which is only trained on licensed images and licensed stock images too. So there are different things in this space where people are trying to make it more moral. But yeah, in short, you can. Whether how you do that and the ethics of it is not a discussion for this, but you can do that.
And then that following question around how it affects IP, then you as the creator, you own the IP. The AI platform wouldn't own that IP.
It depends, to my knowledge, it depends on the license that you have with the AI. So for example, with Midjourney, if you pay for its higher tier, it tells you that you now have commercial terms to the work. But I don't know why you do with one and not with the other. The line to me isn't yet clearly drawn, because it's still me doing a prompt. It's still me engaging with it in a similar way, regardless of the payment tier. So I don't see why one means that it's my copyright and one means that it isn't. So yeah, it's a fascinating area. It's one that needs to be more kind of crystallized, because it's not yet. But yeah, in general terms, you can usually find the answer on the AI's terms of service. And all I can say is people are doing it. People are selling things. And we haven't yet seen sort of a successful legal case, to my knowledge, against somebody doing that. So
Right.
it's up in the air.
Yeah. Fascinating. Lovely. Okay, well, we'll wrap up now. Thank you very much, everybody, for all the chat. Really nice to see you all sharing experiences through the course of this session. It's another great benefit of coming together to discuss these issues. Thank you so much, Jo, for so generously sharing all your brilliant knowledge and insight with us. It's fantastic to have been able to access your experience and your tips. So really, really useful. Yes, as someone said, feeling a little bit less scared now. And let's all go and play with it, but play with it mindful of you know what we're establishing, and that we're kind of introducing best practice, and that we will be those that sort of are admired in the way we use it, and we can influence the commercial sector and the wider charitable sector with our ethical and proportionate but creative responses with this exciting new tool. So thank you very much, Jo, and thanks everyone for joining us. It's been really, really great having you all here.
And thank you, Charlotte, as well. Really enjoyed that. And yeah, thank you all for your questions. And yes, please do email me if you want the slides. I put my email in the chat as well. And I hope you all have an amazing time with the rest of the conference.
Lovely. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.